Hello and welcome to Jay Coletti's Racket Reviews. My name is Jay Coletti, and I will be your hostess. Here on Racket Reviews, we are dedicated to learning about all things organized crime, and today I'm really looking forward to going over the history of the infamous union leader, Jimmy Hoffa. I know many of you have been looking forward to this one, and we have so much to talk about. If you're enjoying the channel and would like to become a Racket Reviews patron, please head on over to the Patreon account and join the Coletti family. Now, without further ado, we have much to discuss. So let's get right to it. Jimmy Hoffa, the man known to be an essential figure in organized crime's union involvement, was infamously powerful, and thus brought light to just how corrupt so many of these unions really were. His fame only added to the speculations about his eventual disappearance, and many attempts to find his body. James Riddle Hoffa, named after his father's brother, and given his mother's maiden name as his middle name, was born on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1913, in Brazil, Indiana, to John and Viola Hoffa. John Cleveland Hoffa was a coal miner of Pennsylvania Dutch lineage. He and his two brothers lived and worked in western Indiana. He was known to have been handsome and brawny. He would remain in school until the 9th grade, and then start work in the mines. He would meet Viola Riddle, an Irish-American girl, in the summer of 1908. Less than a year later, they were married. The small Indiana town of Brazil at that time had only one general practitioner. This doctor told Hoffa's mother, despite the fact that she'd already had 2 children previously, that what she was expecting was not a baby, but a life-threatening tumor. And okay, I understand it was 1913 and the medical practices weren't as advanced as they are today, but come on. She'd already had 2 previous children, and this doctor told her that she had a tumor. Can you imagine the mental anguish on this family thinking for months that this woman was going to die, and then suddenly her water breaks and she gives birth to a baby boy? Anyway, immediately after Hoffa's birth, the family jokingly referred to him as the tumor. The Hoffas would go on to have another child together before John Hoffa died in 1920, some reports say in early 1921, due to lung cancer caused by his work in the mines. The young Jimmy Hoffa was only 7 years old. Viola would then have to work to support her children. The family would move to Detroit in 1924, where there were more job opportunities, and it's likely that Viola did not want her children working in the mines as her late husband had. Jimmy Hoffa would stay in school an even shorter amount of time than his father, leaving school at the age of 14. There is debate about whether or not he even started high school, but he was aged 14, which would put him in the 8th grade, so that seems unlikely that he did start high school. Hoffa got to work immediately, finding minimum wage work in shipping and receiving. This was commonplace for teenagers who had dropped out of school, and Hoffa found work on a loading dock at a Kroger grocery store. And in case you think the 1920s was too early for someone to be working at Kroger, I will remind you that the store was founded in 1883 in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's older than it seems. Hoffa worked for Kroger for a few years, but found that the working conditions were unfair, and he decided to do something about it. At the age of 19 in 1932, during the Depression, when so many people would have done anything for any amount of work, a young Hoffa organized a strike with his fellow receivers. This in itself should be a testament to Hoffa's ability as an organizer. Organizing a successful strike during the era when swarms of people would have given anything for a job really speaks to his ability. The Strawberry Boys, as they would soon be known, held hostage a shipment of fresh strawberries and refused to unload them until Kroger gave them a better workers' deal. This would ultimately lead to Kroger becoming unionized. And Kroger maintains a union today. As we discussed in our episode a couple weeks back, they're associated with the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, UFCW, and as recently as 2019, this union would see convictions on mob-related charges. Hoffa's talent was immediately recognized by the Teamsters Union, and by 1933, at the age of 20, Hoffa would be working for them, and in that same year would become a business agent for Local 299 in Detroit. One of Hoffa's early recruits, William Crow, had the following to say about the union organizer. He stood right close up to you and looked right at you. He can really look at you. His face was, well, open. He was the sincerest guy I've ever met. He gave me confidence. Up to then, I'd been scared to join a union, but Jimmy made me feel that it was just the right thing to do. Hoffa threw himself into his work, organizing strikes and demonstrations all across the Midwest and later across the country. He served his local 299 well, but would be working on tasks far outside the usual boundaries of this local job description. More than location, Hoffa was extending his influence onto nearly every blue-collar job under the sun. This increased not only his status, but the unions. From store clerks to brewery workers, this trucking union organizer was stretching the organization further than it had ever gone before, negotiating contracts for blue-collar workers and forcing political operators to bend the knee to their demands. Naturally, organized crime wanted a piece of this action as well. During Hoffa's cross-country trips as a union organizer, he picked up several contacts in organized crime. Early on, this affiliation was with the local Detroit partnership, with his primary contact being one of Boss Zerilli's most trusted men, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone. In addition to Giacalone, it is known that Angelo Melli, one of the Detroit partnership's top advisors, had assisted Hoffa in foiling the plans of one of his main union rivals, Denny Lewis. Lewis represented a CIO, or a Congress of Industrial Organizations, which represented workers in the mass production industries, including the automobile industry, which at that time was Detroit's bread and butter. The CIOs were initially meant to sweep in and offer employers a better, more affordable deal than what Hoffa had insisted upon. Those sweetheart deals became challenging for Hoffa to contend with, and, to make matters worse, the CIO was able to hire muscle to push Hoffa's men around. You might be familiar with the more modern rendition of a CIO, and that's the AFL-CIO, or the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, which would be founded in 1955. The Teamsters, along with the UFCW and other unions, would actually work with this organization off and on, and then in 2005, they broke away due to the AFL-CIO's lack of interest in organizing. The unions that broke away created the Change to Win Organizing Center, where Hoffa's son, James Hoffa, sits as the organization's chair. Lewis and Hoffa's factions had been battling one another for control of specifically the automobile unions, but there were several other fronts on which they battled. Often, their men battled physically. This went on from about 1935 to 1941. It's likely that Lewis would have won the day if Melli had not stepped in and squashed his efforts to take control from Hoffa. A further connection to Angelo Melli came by way of Hoffa's personal lawyer, Bill Buffalino. Buffalino's cousin was Pennsylvania boss Russell Buffalino, and his wife was Melli's niece. Buffalino said, "The government says that in the underworld you either have to be born in it or you have to get in by marriage. I married a Detroit girl." According to the FBI, Buffalino was a made man and heavily involved in the jukebox rackets where he worked closely with Melli and John Pritziola. He owned Bilvin Distributing Company, which controlled jukebox delivery and maintenance in Detroit. Naturally, the association with Buffalino would connect Hoffa to the eastern United States. With New York and New Jersey, Hoffa's affiliations are most notably with the Genovese family, specifically with Anthony Provenzano, who was a capo in the family and a national vice president for the Teamsters Union during Hoffa's second term as president. Spoiler alert, Hoffa becomes the president of the Teamsters Union. In March of 1936, while Hoffa was organizing the strike, he met Josephine Pozowak, a laundry worker who was part of the strike. 6 months later, on September 24, 1936, she would become Josephine Hoffa. In 1937, Hoffa was elected president of Local 299. Jimmy and Josephine Hoffa would go on to have 2 children, Barbara Ann Hoffa, later Crancer, born on April 8, 1938, who would go on to serve as Associate Circuit Judge of the 21st Missouri Circuit Court from July 1992 to March of 2008, and James P. Hoffa, born on May 19, 1941, who would go on to be the president of the Teamsters Union from 1996 to present day, and the chair of the Change to Win Organizing Center. In 1940, Hoffa purchased property in Memphis, Michigan for $6,500 to run a dairy farm. He built a barn, stalls, brought in livestock and machinery. Josephine, who was not a fan and did not like the weather in Memphis, urged Hoffa to sell the property and drop the daydream of being a weekend farmer. He agreed and sold the property, turning a profit of about $4,000. The people who bought the property, however, would shortly thereafter strike oil on the farm and earn $250,000. Could you imagine the conversation between Josephine and Jimmy that night? Do you think she ever gave him any further advice about real estate purchases? By the early 1940s, Hoffa established the Michigan Conference of Teamsters. This created the opportunity for him to expand across the central United States and across industries. He would team up with several mobsters along the way, who could use these unions to exert influence on political officials, who were often too afraid to run a campaign against the unions that funded their parties. Sound familiar? In Chicago, Hoffa would team up with Chicago outfit gangster and top labor racketeer Joseph Glimko, the brother-in-law to Greek outfit political fixer Gus Alex. It was through Glimko, during the labor disputes with the taxicab unions, that we get the infamous story of taxicabs being thrown into the Chicago River in the 1960s. Hoffa and the Teamsters spent $250,000 campaigning to keep taxi drivers under the thumb of their union. That could have been paid for by striking oil on his family farm. I wonder if he ever brought that up at home. The Teamsters did actually lose their contract with the taxi drivers. Attorney General Robert Kennedy said that he was very pleased with this loss. The director of the Chicago Crime Commission said that this was, quote, just as much a blow to Jimmy Hoffa as it was to Glimko. Hoffa would work his way into the position of a trustee on the General Executive Board in 1947. By 1952, he would be elected vice president of the Teamsters Union. However, that election into the 1952 vice president position comes with a little bit of scrutiny. Dave Beck, the incoming Teamsters president, could credit Hoffa for getting the Central United States Teamsters to secure his position. There had been some internal turmoil between Beck and the previous president Daniel Tobin, who had been president since 1907. Hoffa had settled the tensions and ensured Beck's election. The story goes that in exchange, Beck made sure that Hoffa was elected his VP. In 1955, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters moved their headquarters from Indianapolis, Indiana, to Washington, D.C. It was at this point that Hoffa began his truly national influence, and he hired Bufalino as his personal lawyer. By 1957, Hoffa would be the president of the Teamsters Union after Beck had appeared before the McClellan Committee in March of that year. Beck would plead the Fifth Amendment 117 times, other sources say up to 140. In any case, he was under indictment. Hoffa became the president. As the president, Hoffa worked hard to make sure that the union continued to grow. In 1957, the Teamsters would be kicked out of the AFL-CIO with the stipulation that they could rejoin when Hoffa was no longer president. By 1964, he was able to create the National Master Freight Agreement, which united nearly all truck drivers in North America, not just the United States, under one umbrella, which is an amazing flex of power, especially when you consider the fact that he was under investigation at that time. Interestingly enough, this is where the Teamsters Union website cuts off the coverage about Hoffa, and they also don't mention that he was under investigation. In 1957, when he became president, he was under investigation by the McClellan Committee for attempting to bribe them. He was later acquitted, but would have several other charges levied against him in the following years. Things really stopped going Hoffa's way when John F. Kennedy was elected president and placed his brother Robert Kennedy as Attorney General. A.G. Kennedy made it a priority to target Hoffa, even allegedly creating a secret quote-unquote Get Hoffa squad in the Justice Department, which, if true, is very illegal. A government agent or agency cannot simply just target a private citizen. It is a direct breach of innocent until proven guilty. Some reports, however, claim that this is an incorrect characterization of A.G. Kennedy and that his goal was to thwart organized crime broadly, not specifically Jimmy Hoffa. Of the 7 times Jimmy Hoffa was put on trial, he was acquitted 5 times, giving Bufalino about a 71.5% success rate representing Hoffa, which, given Hoffa's record, not bad. After Hoffa was on trial for conspiracy in 1962, in 1963 he would be indicted for jury tampering in that case. He was convicted of this in 1964 and sentenced to 8 years behind bars and a $10,000 fine. While out on bail, he would also be convicted for mail and wire fraud, conspiracy, and improper use of the Teamsters pension fund. He was sentenced to an additional 5 years. During his time in prison, Hoffa would resign as the Teamsters president. Less than 5 years into his sentence, Hoffa, after having applied 3 times to the Federal Parole Board and receiving a denial each time, would be granted federal clemency. Not by Kennedy, of course, but by Nixon on December 23, 1971, just in time for Christmas. The deal was that Hoffa was to stay away from all union and criminal activities, a condition which he naturally ignored immediately. By 1974, he was trying to campaign to be president of the Teamsters again. This was naturally met with resistance, so he went back to Local 299 to get footing and start again. It's reported that Josephine Hoffa was very lonely in their marriage, as her husband was always away on business or in prison. It's perhaps because of this loneliness we get the story that she was having an affair with the Detroit partnership chief, Tony Cimini. When Hoffa found out about the affair, he went to partnership boss Joseph Cirilli and demanded something be done about Cimini. When nothing happened, the story goes that Hoffa arranged for Cimini to be arrested for fraud. And it would seem, if this is the true story, that Hoffa sealed his own fate. Hoffa would disappear on July 30th, 1975, after he was scheduled to meet with Anthony Provenzano, who had once served as his VP for the Teamsters, but the two had recently had a falling out while serving time behind bars together, and Anthony Giacalone is in with the Detroit partnership. They were supposed to meet at the Macca's Red Fox restaurant in a Detroit suburb at 2 p.m. So the typical narrative is that Hoffa was captured and killed by his lunch companions. It seems like the logical choice and a good solution, but this was not a solution. This is where the plot thickens. Just before his disappearance, Hoffa called his wife from a payphone and let her know that Giacalone and Provenzano had stood him up. They weren't there. Later, Giacalone and Provenzano would insist that they never met with Hoffa that day. Hoffa told his wife that he would be home around 4 o'clock and to make steaks for dinner. Multiple witnesses saw Hoffa pacing near his car. Some people even recognized him and stopped to shake his hand. The FBI seems to believe that Hoffa left the area around 2:30–2:45. There has been one witness account claiming to see Hoffa in the back of a car with 3 other people inside. But that's it. Just like that, Hoffa disappeared from the face of the earth, and to this day, despite multiple false alarms and law enforcement digs to find his body based off countless tips, his body has never been found. The reigning belief is that Hoffa was murdered by the Mafia, but his former lawyer, Bill Buffalino, claimed before he died that Hoffa had been killed during a covert CIA operation to kill Fidel Castro. James Riddle Hoffa was officially declared dead in absentia on July 30th, 1982. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Racket Reviews, stepping through the history of the life and mysterious disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. I know many of you have been very eager for this episode, and I appreciate your patience because it has taken me quite a while to comb through all of this information. Make sure to let me know in the comments section below or on Facebook and Twitter what you think about Jimmy Hoffa, and also, what do you think happened to him? Also, don't forget to utilize the comment section and social media to let me know who or what you would like to see covered next. I always love hearing from you, and I'm always happy to investigate. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click notifications to get more Mafia content sent directly to your subbox. Ciao.